October 2011, Asheville, North Carolina. A young woman's car is found abandoned on the Blue Ridge Parkway, doors locked, engine cold. Her bag left neatly inside. But Rebecca Klein was gone. No signs of a struggle. No trace of where she went. Years later, hikers stumbled on her missing journal nailed to a tree deep in the woods, with chilling words scrawled inside. She begged me to stop. She is part of me, now. And then came the voicemail. A voice no one could identify, whispering, "Becca, you can disappear, but you can't hide from what you are." Who left it? And is the phantom of the Parkway still out there, hunting? Before we dive deeper, hit subscribe for more unsolved cold cases and chilling mysteries. The rain started as a whisper, a fine nervous mist that slicked the highway and made the streetlights smear into long, trembling halos. Rebecca Klein drove like she always did when she was thinking. Hands light at 10 and 2, jaw clenched, as if she could steer her life out of whatever pressure had built up behind her ribs. The dashboard clock read 10:17 p.m. October in the Blue Ridge made the air sharper. When she opened the windows for a breath, the mountain smell, wet earth pine resin, the faint sweetness of recently fallen apples, came in and caught her by the throat. She'd left Charlotte that afternoon with a duffel bag and a playlist she'd curated for a drive that was supposed to clear something inside her rather than solve it. On paper, the trip was ordinary. A long weekend with an old college friend in Asheville, a town Rebecca had loved for its creaky porches and late-night diners, for the way the river walked through the city like a secret. In the months before, she'd been smaller than she looked, a person who turned down plans and apologized about being tired. She had a respectable job as a paralegal, a neat apartment, a mother who called every Sunday. She had, in her journal, inked a long freckled list of small betrayals and things she wanted to stop being afraid of. The 240 belt around Asheville was worse than she remembered. Traffic clung to the asphalt. A delivery truck sat like a wounded animal on the shoulder. Rebecca navigated past brake lights and damp lanes, the glow of downtown apartment windows flickering ahead. She thought about the friend who'd texted 2 hours earlier, "Bring wine. Bring you." And about how easy it had been that afternoon to tuck anger under her sweater. The light ahead turned red, then green. A man in a hoodie crossed the crosswalk. A policeman waved a van through. Rebecca breathed. Music laced the car's small interior. A song about leaving, about how sometimes you had to get lost to find what was true. She took exit 5 for Patton Avenue because she liked that it offered the slow way into a town. The route gave you time to notice things: murals, the cafe with a chipped enamel sign, the old theater with a marquee that read, "Tomorrow night, stand up." She told herself she had time. The motel would wait. The friend could wait. Time was a liquid she could pour from one cup to another. When she turned onto Biltmore Avenue, the rain changed from whisper to something that kept saying, "You'd better pay attention." She noticed the outline of a pickup parked under a tree, hazard lights blinking like a moth in distress. It was there, then gone. Perhaps it moved down the block. Perhaps the driver had stepped inside the adjacent restaurant. Small things that occupy the mind for a moment and then drift away. She cut through a light, and the tires sang against the wet pavement. A couple argued on the sidewalk, their voices a muffled staccato. The smell of fried food from a late-night kitchen blew in and out. She passed an older woman sweeping a stoop. Rebecca felt suddenly guilty. For canceling on a meeting the previous week, for not calling her mother back until late Sunday, for the way the small, steady lines in her life had begun to fray. She pulled into the lot by the river to take a call. Her boss left a voicemail earlier chastising her for a missed deadline. Rebecca told herself she'd answer in the morning, that she was chasing something important, a conversation about who she wanted to be. The call came through just after 10:30. The voice on the other end was the friend, quick, cheerful. "Where are you?" Rebecca checked the GPS, said she was near the river, asking if they should grab coffee. They made a plan to meet at a roadside diner, but the friend said half-jokingly, "Hurry. I'm running out of patience and coffee." Rebecca laughed and then hung up. On her phone, a short message came in from an unknown number. 2 words and a heart. She ignored it. It was 10:57 when her taillight caught the reflection of a truck at the corner, a hulking shadow that seemed too heavy for the narrow side street. She slowed because something in the driveway made her slow. The distant sound of an engine idling too long, of someone who didn't want to be noticed. She saw movement at the edge of the lot, a silhouette flanked by a street lamp, and for a beat the blue light of police cars flashed in her peripheral vision. The silhouette shifted. Then the shadow stepped back into the dark. Rebecca told herself she was being paranoid. There are always shadows in cities. They had to be, because people slept on couches. She turned the wheel, aimed for the diner 2 blocks ahead, and then the radio fuzzed and cut out for a breath, the kind of mechanical hiccup you don't notice until it happens a second time. Her phone pinged with a voicemail she didn't play. She checked the rear view and saw headlights blink once, twice, then go dark. When she never arrived at the diner, her friend called again and again. The police found the duffel bag, still zipped, on a bench near the river the next morning. Someone had tipped off a security guard about a purse by the foot of the old flashlight sculpture, a quiet, tasteful metal thing locals called the river lantern. The bag inside was small, a strapless dress, a pair of ballet flats, a lipstick tube. A receipt from a pharmacy dated 6 hours earlier. No blood. No sign that she had been in a fight. That afternoon, Rebecca's car, a blue Honda Civic, was found in the gravel of a narrow turnout on a stretch of the Blue Ridge Parkway about 10 miles south of Asheville, engine cold. Doors locked from the inside. The county made a show of searching. Helicopters circled like impatient birds, while officers in rain-proof jackets combed the woods with dogs, flashlights puncturing the damp gloom. They brought in dive teams for the river. They drew chalk around tire tracks and took photographs of moss disturbed like someone had been dragged through the soft earth. They interviewed neighbors who said they'd seen nothing unusual. Someone found a cigarette, but by the turnout, DNA a match to a transient who had died the year before. Everything led to a dead end. The press called it an odd disappearance. The local reporter on Channel 7 said mysterious, in a tone that smelled of cliché and desperation. The national outlets flirted with the story for 2 days and then slid away to the next bright thing. Rebecca's mother, June Klein, held on to the idea that her daughter would walk back into the house covered in mud and apologized for being late. She made flyers with the photo from Rebecca's college graduation, the broad smile, the bright eyes. She posted them on telephone poles and in laundromats. She was on every local morning show, ragged at the edges, asking people to call a hotline. She stood on the steps of the police station and asked for more. The sheriff said they were doing everything. He put a manila folder on a table and let the cameras zoom in. Everyone was doing everything. Nothing brought Rebecca home. Rumors traveled faster than evidence. At the cafe, a woman swore she'd seen Rebecca get into a black SUV. An older man said he'd seen 3 figures arguing on the parkway the night Rebecca vanished. A teenager confessed on a message board that he and his friends had followed a girl and then lost her. The friends in Rebecca's circle were interrogated by their own heads. What had they missed? There were petty accusations, jealousies, and a slow, corrosive guilt that wormed through relationships. When you watch a life dissolve in public, you start to look for reasons, because if you can find a reason, you can make the unknown less terrifying. The investigators found fingerprints inside Rebecca's car that didn't belong to anyone in her life. A smear on the passenger door matched a man listed in state records as unknown. He had moved through minor crimes like a ghost, never holding a steady address. The lead detective, a man named Luis Ortega, who smelled faintly of coffee and winter tobacco, kept a corkboard with her photograph at the center and string running out to names and dates. He worked late, his eyes red from the light of the case files. He believed, stubbornly, in answers, in the arithmetic of footprints and inkings of evidence. Months gave way to seasons. Snow smothered the Blue Ridge. Spring returned, and the river rose and fell like breath. But for the Kleins, the calendar became a drum you can't step away from. Every holiday was a sharpened thing. The town made a small memorial under the river walkway. Candles, handwritten notes, a small teddy bear with its fur worn thin. The memorial became a place for strangers to leave things, the kind of community ritual that says, without words, we remember. Years passed. Tips came in, some serious, most not. Someone swore a confession over a late-night bourbon. An internet sleuth matched a grainy photograph of a truck to a known offender's vehicle. The DNA from the cigarette, but matched someone unable to be located. Law enforcement kept files in boxes, labels fading. The sheriff's office moved on. New detectives came to the case, their faces unfamiliar in the family photos. Evidence was re-examined with new machines. And in 2014, a forensic lab found a hair on the Civic's rear seat, a single hair too fine, and half the length the lab could definitively assign to trace. It didn't match Rebecca's. It matched no one in the database. Rebecca's father did what parents who need to do something do. He kept driving up the parkway, stopped at the turnout where the car had been found, sat in the Civic for hours at a time, and tried to remember a voice. He haunted the sheriff's office and made a wall of post-it notes inside the public bathroom at the county library that read "Don't forget." He became the sort of man who looked like grief could be measured and cataloged, and it went on the desk next to him like a pile of unpaid bills. In the years that followed, the case collected strange little artifacts the way a beach shoreline collects shells. A college student found a faded scarf washed onto the bank of the river 3 summers later. It bore a faint perfume Rebecca used to wear. A retired mail carrier remembered seeing a woman matching Rebecca's description at a convenience store. She looked lost, he said. And although his memory wobbled with the weather, the line between what was real and what was hoped for thinned like paper. The police once found a shrine of sorts on a ridge above the parkway. A set of smooth stones arranged in a circle and a single ballet flat nailed to a post. The shoe had been there long enough to rot into the wood. Then, on a late autumn evening 5 years after Rebecca disappeared, a call came in to the sheriff's anonymous tip line. The voice was muffled, the syllables thick with concentration. "I don't want to be involved," the caller said, "but I saw something 5 years ago." He or she claimed to have been parked along the parkway that night because the stars had been particularly bright and they'd wanted to watch them. They remembered a woman walking down into the trees. They remembered a pickup truck idling. They remembered headlights disappearing through a dip in the road. They swore they'd told someone at the time, but no one had believed them. Detective Ortega, whose hair had grayed at the temples, sat in a small interrogation room and listened. He pressed for details that the call could not supply. Make of truck, a license plate, the sound of a voice. Memory, he knew, is a treacherous collaborator. The caller's specifics were fuzzy, but the direction of the witness's gaze, away from the road, towards a break in the tree line, was exact enough that Ortega sent a team to comb the ridge. They found the scrape of an old path, long overgrown, but evident under moss and new soil. A trodden hem where something had been dragged, maybe years ago. It led to a shallow cavity in the earth, wrapped in bracken and roots. There, beneath a rotted board, they found a box, the kind used for shoes, sealed with masking tape and filled with ordinary things. A Polaroid of Rebecca laughing on a college green, a pressed paper daisy, a small silver ring that gave the light back like it remembered being bright. There was also a notebook in Rebecca's hand, pages of lists and crossed-out apologies, the small loop of her handwriting slender and sure. The discovery set the town alight. For a week the sheriff's office held press conferences, and the family felt, truly felt, the surge of hope like an electric current. But the box did not contain answers. It contained artifacts of Rebecca's life, and in a corner, a folded slip of paper with a single line. "I didn't run." No matter how the investigators turned it, the line refused to bend into explanation. The soil around the box took fingerprints that matched no one in the system. The Polaroid showed Rebecca in a sun-bleached setting, smiling at someone just outside the frame, someone whose shadow met the edge of the picture. People stared at the shadow like it might reveal a personality or a motive. It didn't. The media, smelling a revival, descended. The story turned from mysterious disappearance to a puzzle about memory. Panelists argued about whether Rebecca had been taken or had chosen to step off the map. Some wrote think pieces about the way women's stories are swallowed by fear. Others speculated about a jealous lover or a random act of violence. The family suffered the double pain of having their loss turned into argument and spectacle. They had their privacy ripped open and posted on late-night talk shows. Strangers offered opinions like bandages, luminescent and ineffective. In the quiet spaces, the Kleins continued to hope and to learn how to live inside the absence. June became an involuntary expert on missing person procedure. She could name the difference between an Amber Alert and a private search team, could recite the number to call, could tell you what to do if a file goes cold. She learned to speak in press rooms without choking. Her husband, in a slower grief, took up woodworking as a way to feel something he could finish. They both testified at hearings about funding for cold case units, their voices thin but steady. Grief, they discovered, can be full of civic purpose. Then, quietly, the town kept its secrets and chose to protect them. Friends who had been questioned began to go silent or moved away, their grief shaded by shame or simple exhaustion. The volunteer groups that once put up flyers dwindled into a handful who still walked the river at dusk, calling Rebecca's name like prayers. A new sheriff took office who seemed less interested in headlines than in keeping the book straight. The case file thickened with marginal notes and polite replies. People who had once been suspects died of illness or old age. The trail frayed. The final chapter, and the thing that turned every attempt at closure into a fresh carve at an open wound, was a small, almost ridiculous detail. A voicemail left on Rebecca's phone the night she vanished, found by a forensic technician scanning old backups 3 years after the fact. At first, everyone expected nothing. A machine beep, static, perhaps the echo of an unanswered call. But when they amplified the file and cleaned the hiss with careful software, there was a sound. It was a voice, low, measured, and a little amused. "Becca," the voice said, like it was tasting the name, "you can disappear, but you can't hide from what you are." It wasn't a confession. It was not a threat that could be pinned on a person with charges. It was, for all its rhetorical flourish, a line that reopened things that had been kept half-closed. Rebecca's mother listened to that recording in a room that smelled of stale coffee and fear, and then put her hands over her mouth until the shape of air in the room steadied. Months later, as the town shrugged and weather turned and new families moved into old houses, a child found a single earring at the edge of a playground, a tiny gold hoop that belonged on a different wrist, but could plausibly have been lost by anyone. People whispered. A man on the message board swore he'd found a faded coat in a neighbor's shed that smelled like lavender and cigarette smoke. The sheriff's office filed each tip and answered each one with the same patient note: under investigation. Time had not thinned into forgetfulness. It had varnished the memory and made it harder to touch. The case never closed. There was no arrest, no courtroom drama, where a jury decided for or against a narrative and then moved on. Instead, Rebecca's disappearance became a thing like the river, an unanswerable flow that cut through the town and still left downstream people who were changed by what they floated past. Her name was brought up in conversations about safety and in the hesitant, moralistic tones adults used when telling teenagers to call home by midnight. It became a cautionary tale and a wound both. Sometimes, on nights when the rain started to whisper and the clock said it was late enough that the highway was a smear of lights and shadow, June would stand by her window and imagine Rebecca turning the corner toward home. She believed in a set of private truths, that the person who took Rebecca had looked at her and seen a life someone else could reshape, that the person would be found or would not, that, in the end, the part of her daughter that had been bright and defiant and very, very alive had not been permitted to be ordinary. She would think of Rebecca's lists, the small loops and intentions written in ink, and imagine them arranged like a constellation. The stars did not answer. They only made shapes to hold the lack. To watch the story of Rebecca Klein is to watch a community try to keep a light burning for a face gone soft at the edges. There are clever theories, internet detectives with timelines and maps, and sincere friends who dream of answers. There are nights a TV camera shows a family hugging and a sheriff promising to never give up. There are also all the small, quieter things that never make it into headlines. A neighbor leaving a plate of food on a stoop with a post-it that reads "thinking of you." A florist delivering a bouquet for no reason. A child drawing a picture of a woman with long hair under a tree. The most honest way to end any telling of what happened to Rebecca is to stop pretending there is a single finality. She vanished from a highway in a way that left the town with a question that could not be resolved by evidence alone. Her disappearance carved out space for compassion and for suspicion, for solidarity and for rumor. It forced strangers to become witnesses and neighbors to become detectives. It taught the town that some mysteries cannot be solved by will alone. If you stand at that turnout on the parkway in the rain, you will see, if you're willing to look, how the road holds the memory, a patch of crushed grass, a scatter of stones, the faint imprint of a tire flicking into the dirt. You can imagine Rebecca there, not as a photograph, but as a procession of moments, a laugh, a silly photo, a hand tucked into a pocket, a breath taken before an exit, a voice on the phone that said she was nearly there. In the end, Rebecca's life resists being compressed into a single theory. It is not a puzzle meant to be solved for satisfaction. It is a life whose absence is a presence in itself, a living proof of how a small, ordinary person can leave behind a map of questions that will be followed for years. Perhaps one day someone will tell the whole thing, and there will be final sentences that close the book. Perhaps not. For now, people still whisper her name at the river, and at night the lights of Asheville Riverwalk shimmer, and somewhere in the dark, a voicemail waits, and a voice, measured and amused, says her name as if it were a thing you could both lose and carry. The discovery of that voicemail should have been the end of it. At least, that's what the detectives told themselves. They preserved the tape, brought in voice analysts, compared the cadence of those 3 words, "Becca, you can disappear," against hundreds of known offenders and suspects. Nothing matched. Nothing fit. It was a phantom voice, like the whisper of the mountains themselves. But silence has a way of breeding obsession. Detective Ortega, though nearing retirement, found himself returning again and again to the turnout where Rebecca's Honda had been abandoned. He walked the gravel, the moss, the gnarled trees pressing in like witnesses who had decided long ago to keep their secrets. He would stand there long after his flashlight batteries drained, waiting for some trace of her to present itself. More than once he caught himself listening, heart hammering, because in the hush of a forest, he thought he heard footsteps behind him. It wasn't just Ortega. Locals began to whisper about the Blue Ridge Phantom, a shadow figure, seen on misty nights along the parkway, a man-shaped outline who stood in the same spot where Rebecca was last seen. Drivers swore headlights would cut through fog and illuminate a figure for a single heartbeat, only for it to vanish when they slowed down. Some said it was her ghost, still searching for home. Others swore it was the person who had taken her, watching to make sure the truth stayed buried. Then came the hikers. In late October 2018, a pair of college students camping off the parkway stumbled into a clearing not far from the turnout. There, nailed into the trunk of an old oak, was another of Rebecca's belongings, her leather journal, sealed inside a plastic bag to keep out the weather. The students brought it straight to the police. Inside were pages they didn't recognize, words written in a jagged, unfamiliar hand. One entry read, "She begged me to stop. I told her this was the only way. She is part of me now." Another read, "The river keeps what I give it. The mountains hold the rest." The final page contained only a crude drawing, a pair of headlights in the dark, and a figure standing in the beam. The handwriting didn't match Rebecca's. It didn't match anyone on file, but it was written inside her journal, between her lists and her private notes. The horror was immediate. Had someone stalked her for months before she vanished? Or had they kept the journal after the fact, taunting investigators years later by returning it to the woods like an offering? Rebecca's parents broke apart when they saw it. Her mother collapsed, whispering, "He made her write this. He made her." Her father refused to believe the words at all, insisting some sick stranger had planted them. But for the town, the journal was proof that something darker than chance had consumed Rebecca's last night. The police tightened their patrols, but fear already had its claws in Asheville. Women stopped driving alone at night along the parkway. Joggers carried pepper spray. Gas stations reported drivers pulling in trembling, swearing they'd been followed by a vehicle that blinked its headlights twice and then vanished. And then, in November, another car was found. It was the same turnout, the same gravel crunch. A silver Toyota Corolla, sat abandoned with its doors unlocked. In the back seat was a purse belonging to a young nurse who had been on her way home from a night shift. But the difference this time was chilling. She came back. The nurse stumbled out of the woods hours later, clothes torn, lips blue from cold. She kept muttering the same phrase over and over, "The man with no face, the man with no face." When paramedics asked her what had happened, she claimed she'd been stopped by a figure who stood in the middle of the road. His face, she said, was hidden by something. A mask, maybe, or just darkness itself. He told her to leave the car and walk into the woods. She didn't remember anything after that until she woke up shivering beneath a tree. The sheriff downplayed it, calling it a case of exhaustion and hallucination. But the people of Asheville weren't fooled. It was happening again. The phantom wasn't finished. Detective Ortega, against the advice of his superiors, met with the nurse privately. Her story never changed. But there was one detail she hadn't told the others. When the faceless man had spoken, his voice had been low, measured, a little amused. It was the same voice from Rebecca's voicemail. The revelation shattered Ortega. For years he believed Rebecca's killer had disappeared into the dark, leaving nothing behind. Now he realized the truth. Whoever had taken her was still here, still hunting, still waiting for the right night. Haunted, Ortega began piecing together every unsolved disappearance within 50 miles of Asheville. The map lit up with red pins, forming a rough circle around the Blue Ridge Parkway. There were more names than anyone wanted to admit. Hikers who never returned, motorists whose cars were found cold on the shoulder, a college student last seen at a bus stop. And in every single case, there was a witness who reported the same strange detail. Headlights blinking twice before vanishing. The phantom's calling card. The final chilling discovery came in the winter of 2019. A storm had uprooted a tree not far from the turnout, tearing open the earth beneath. Hikers discovered what the roots had hidden, a shallow pit lined with stones. Inside were fragments of clothing, half buried, shredded by time. Among them was a silver charm bracelet with the initials RK scratched faintly into the metal. Rebecca's. Tests confirmed it. The bracelet was the first physical evidence linking her to that exact spot. But there were no remains, no body, just that small, glittering piece of proof that she had, indeed, been there, and that the forest had swallowed the rest. The Kleins held a memorial, though it was hollow. A closed casket with nothing inside. A photo instead of a body. Neighbors whispered condolences that felt thin against the enormity of absence. Detective Ortega retired soon after. He left the case file on his desk, swollen with papers, maps, photographs, and notes. But in the margin of the final page, in his own cramped handwriting, he left one line. He isn't finished. Even now, years later, the Blue Ridge Parkway carries the weight of her story. Travelers swear they see her face reflected in the rearview mirror, pale and fleeting. Some hear her name whispered over the hum of their radios. And on rain-slick nights, when headlights blink twice before disappearing into the mist, drivers grip the wheel tighter and press harder on the gas. Because everyone in Asheville knows, Rebecca Klein's story didn't end. It's still out there, waiting, in the shadows of the mountain road. And the phantom is still watching. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and turn on the notification bell, so you stay updated with mystery stories that strike a chord. Thanks for watching.